Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'm so pleased to welcome Chairman Pai of the Federal Communications Commission, Ajit Pai. Thank you so much for joining us for a special conversation today about building our future infrastructure and 5G. And we've had some exciting news on 5G in the last 24 hours. So I think this is going to be a very compelling conversation. It's so good to be with you today.
So good to be with you, Emily, and thanks to the Milken Institute for hosting this conversation.
Agreed. So I want to start with you and I. We're obviously both in our homes right now. I'm actually in my home studio in my basement. And so many people in remote work situations, kids learning remotely at home has put an incredible amount of pressure on our networks. How have the networks performed and how have they risen to this challenge?
The networks have performed incredibly well considering the uptick in internet traffic, both fixed and wireless, that we have seen since March, when millions of Americans shifted to a work at home, stay at home environment. In terms of fixed broadband demand, for example, we saw something like a 15 to 30% increase at peak in terms of demands on the networks. And on the mobile side as well, about a 15 to 25% increase. And what's incredible is not just that our networks were able to sustain that peak, average fixed speeds and mobile speeds in the US have gone up from February until August. And so that's partly because companies have put in the heavy lifting, the capital, the work crews, et cetera, to build networks that are able to withstand even the peak of the pandemic related traffic boom.
Now, that said, we've also seen just how wide the digital divide is. And there are some kids who can't log on because their parents don't have connectivity or they don't have the devices that they need. I know the FCC is doing a lot of work to increase broadband access. How long before all Americans actually have the connectivity that they need?
That's a great question. It's been our top priority since I took office in 2017, closing that digital divide. In fact, the last visit I did before the pandemic ceased our travel was to the Wind River Reservation, a remote rural reservation where the Northern Arapaho and Eastern Shoshone tribes are struggling with that very issue. So we've done a lot. And in fact, our biggest initiative yet is coming up. On October 29th, we'll start a $20 billion Rural Digital Opportunity Fund auction, essentially targeting that money to unserved parts of the country where there is no broadband at the FCC's definition of 25 megabits per second. We'll also be voting later this month on a 5G fund for rural America, the next generation of wireless connectivity. We recognize there are rural areas that may not get private investment without help from the federal government, and we want to step in to provide that extra oomph to get the business case underway. We've also done a lot over the last 3.5 years before anyone heard of COVID in terms of modernizing our regulations, easier and quicker access to utility poles, encouraging companies to focus on fiber investment instead of the fading copper networks, and removing utility-style regulation from the internet. All of these things have led to capex in broadband networks that is a multiple of what other countries and regions see in the world.
Things like telehealth, for example, I imagine that's something you're only expecting to increase. And I know that you've got this $200 million telehealth program. Where exactly is the money going for that?
Thanks for asking the question. So I urged Congress in February and in March to include authority and funding for the FCC to set up that COVID-19 telehealth program, and they did. And the CARES Act gave us that $200 million of funding. Congress passed the law on a Thursday. The president signed it on Friday. The following Monday, I asked my fellow commissioners to vote on my plan to execute it. And we've now done that. We've distributed or authorized the distribution of $200 million to 539 healthcare providers across the United States, disproportionately in harder hit areas by COVID, from New York City to Navajo Nation. And we're starting to get incredible stories back about how that money is being used. For example, child transplant patients in Pittsburgh at the University of Pittsburgh Children's Hospital who are immunocompromised now don't have to come back into the facility to get tested. They can be monitored remotely. And I mentioned the Navajo Nation. They're using that money to provide connections between healthcare providers and patients who otherwise might have to drive for several hours in the vast Navajo Nation to see a provider. So I hope that of the many dismal things we've seen in the pandemic, one of the silver linings might be that connected care has finally met its moment, and we can make it more the norm now rather than the exception.
Now, in the last 24 hours, we've had some new iPhones unveiled that all have 5G capability. 5G, however, is not really ready for prime time. It's pretty spotty across the United States. Samsung has had 5G phones out for a while. How much do you think these new iPhones could actually change the game for 5G?
It's a good question, and I'll be excited to see how the introduction of the new Apple iPhone goes. But certainly, I think that 5G offers consumers, both individual consumers and small businesses, tremendous potential. Everybody talks, for example, about the much higher speeds, the much more lower latency, the responsiveness in the networks. But I think in particular about some of the applications that consumers are going to be able to use with 5G. Everything from telehealth to gaming, remote learning, you name it. Everything is on tap. It's going to transform entire sectors of our industry. And that's part of the reason why the FCC, for the last 2 years, has been executing aggressively our 5G fast plan, putting in place the building blocks in terms of spectrum and infrastructure to allow American entrepreneurs and innovators to thrive and deliver value to the American consumer.
Now, the US carriers are making some broad pronouncements about upgrades they're making to their networks, but when will there truly be nationwide 5G?
A good question. So a lot of the carriers are now rolling out 5G networks. One carrier, for example, activating some of its 600 megahertz low band spectrum, is now covering something like 200 million Americans with 5G. And other companies are participating in our spectrum auctions. In fact, the most recent one we had, it was interesting. You saw non-telecom players competing, cable companies, electric utilities, and others. And so I think 5G is going to be, it will involve much greater diversification in terms of the companies providing services and the types of services they provide using these airwaves. It's an exciting time for consumers and for businesses alike.
To support 5G infrastructure, would you support if they wanted to lease some of their antenna space, for example, to this effort?
Well, certainly we'd be open to any innovative pitches in terms of companies or government entities that have access to spectrum assets or want access to spectrum assets. And I can imagine that there might be some interesting use cases at the Postal Service, either for them to benefit from some of the 5G innovation that's out there, or at least since they have infrastructure all over the country, to make it easier to deploy some of the guts of the small cells and other 5G network architecture that would be essential to increasing coverage. So always interested to hear some of these pitches. And it's just amazing, honestly, that in 2020, we've reached the point where the Postal Service and the FCC might have some areas of overlap. That's not something you would have heard in previous generations.
Now, there are other countries that are ahead of the United States on 5G. One of them is China. Are you concerned about US competitiveness given how built out their infrastructure is already?
Well, there's no question that China is a major geopolitical rival when it comes to 5G. And that's why we've made it a point from the earliest days of our administration to make sure that, as I said, we put the building blocks in place for private sector innovation here. The largest spectrum auctions in history. In fact, over the last 3 years, we've auctioned off almost 5,000 megahertz of high band spectrum. That's more spectrum than was held by all terrestrial mobile broadband providers combined when I got into office. In terms of infrastructure, too, we scaled up dramatically. Something like 7,000 small cells were deployed in 2016. That number has now increased to over 87,000, with 46,000 of those deployed last year alone. Fiber deployment, we're setting records. So I actually think we're in very good stead in relation to China. We've also taken some major steps in terms of the security of the supply chain regarding companies like Huawei and CTE, working across the government and with other governments from Bahrain to Belgium. We've been able to put in place a shared understanding of the risk-based framework we all need to have when it comes to 5G security and the threat that certain Chinese companies in particular might present.
Here in the US, there's been a big rearranging in the carrier hierarchy. And now that the T-Mobile and Sprint deal is done, are they bringing the innovation and price competition that you expected?
I think they are. If you looked at the merged entity, I mean, they're competing very vigorously on price and service. In fact, just yesterday, I saw an announcement that they have announced new home broadband offerings, which is not something typically that a wireless carrier had done. In addition to that, the conditions that we imposed on the new company, in particular, 97% 5G coverage within 3 years and 99% 5G coverage of the American population within 6 years, those are major, major benefits for American consumers. And they're also turbocharging some of these spectrum assets that Sprint had, the legacy Sprint company had, that weren't fully deployed, in particular the 2.5 gigahertz spectrum. So I do think that they have lit a fire under some of the other competitors in the marketplace and are delivering value. And that's exactly the reason why I think we made the right decision.
Now, we're about to have a major presidential election, and the president has voiced major concerns about Section 230, which is part of the Communications Decency Act that protects tech platforms from liability for content that their users post. Republicans are concerned about anti-conservative bias. Democrats are concerned about misinformation. The president has asked the FCC to take it on. What's your response to that?
There's no question that this has become an increasingly important issue to millions of Americans, and that's part of the reason why the FCC put out for comment a recent petition filed by the Department of Commerce on behalf of the administration, asking us to take a look at certain aspects of Section 230. That public comment period just expired recently, and so we'll be looking to the staff to sift through the record, figure out what various viewpoints were, and then come up with a recommendation on the appropriate way forward. So I can't say exactly where we will end up or when we will end up there, but it's something we are looking at very carefully.
That said, just this morning, the New York Post published a controversial story about Hunter Biden, and Facebook has already said they're going to reduce distribution of this story, which is quite an active step towards potentially more editorializing. Do you think that's a choice that these platforms, which are so big and almost like utilities, is that a choice these platforms should be making?
That's a good question. So I can't speak as to the effect on Section 230, of course, but what I will say is something that I said in November of 2017 when I gave a speech talking about these social media platforms and the fact that they aren't transparent. Consumers don't understand who is making the decisions, how they are making them, or why they are making them. And I do think that there is a growing recognition in this country, and you hear it in the halls of Congress as well from Republicans and Democrats alike, that these tech giants should be more transparent and disclose exactly what they're doing and why. That's just something we expect in virtually every marketplace, not just the communications sector.
You do have O'Reilly, who expressed some concerns about this Section 230 issue, and then the White House withdrew their support for his nomination to serve another term. Can you move forward without him, given that otherwise the FCC is likely deadlocked on this issue?
Well, I haven't spoken to Commissioner O'Reilly on this particular issue, so I can't say, but what I will say on behalf of myself, of course, I'm the only one I can speak for, is that I will always commit, and on this issue, on every single issue, to follow the facts and to follow the law. That's been my guide star over the last 3.5 years as chairman, and that's the only way I know how to do the job and to do it as well as I can. So I can promise you that, and you can't say how everything else will shake out.
On that note, we're coming up on 4 years of your tenure. When you look back, what are you most proud of, and what are some things that you wish you'd gotten done?
Oh, well, it's hard to say because when you're in the middle of the sprint, it's always difficult to see where the finish line is and to think about what you'll do in terms of retrospection. The finish line is reached. But I will say the things I'm proudest of thus far are major efforts on closing the digital divide and getting to meet some of the people who've benefited from those decisions. Putting in place the building blocks for American leadership in the world on 5G has been very important to me. Some of the consumer protection steps we've taken in terms of protecting people against robocalls, getting accessibility for those with disabilities to this technology, establishing 988 as a 3-digit number for suicide prevention and mental health. I mean, those are some of the things that really matter to me a lot. And then also looking to the future. I know that there's always a tendency for FCC chairs or others in this space to just look at where technology is now, but we've actually taken a look at the future: artificial intelligence, machine learning, open radio access networks, looking at things like quantum computing and blockchain, and just different things like that. We want to have a view as to where technology is going so we can anticipate it and allow regulators to deliver value to consumers before consumers might even know what this technology is. That's a way to preserve American leadership in technology, I think.
So last question then before I let you go, robocalls. Will you get rid of those before you leave, if you leave, or not?
They drive me crazy, just like they drive everyone else crazy. And so we have taken major steps. In fact, we've imposed a mandate on telephone companies to adopt a caller ID authentication framework, essentially a digital fingerprint for every single phone call. And that is going to be implemented and is being implemented now. We've also issued stern warnings to gateway providers, the initial entry point in the US for companies that for robocallers, and those companies have cut off the source of robocalls. We have much more to do in this space, obviously. This is our top consumer complaint category, but we are making progress. Something like 28% fewer robocalls in August compared to the previous August. So we want to continue that positive momentum until consumers finally have the peace of mind that they deserve at the dinner table.
All right. Ajit Pai, Chairman of the FCC, thank you so much for joining us. I'm sorry about the technical issues, but we made it through, and what a great conversation. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks to you again. A conversation made possible by technology, so we want to continue that into the future.
Yes, work on that broadcast.
Will do.
Okay. Thank you all for joining us. Now moving into our next session about building infrastructure and the future of 5G. Joining me now, we've got Cristiano Hahn, the president of Qualcomm, as well as Guru Mohammed, CEO of Verizon Media, and Andrew Weinberg, founder, managing partner, and CEO of Brightstar Capital, along with Amy Webb, the founder of the Future Today Institute. Thank you all so much for joining us, and great to have you today on the back of a conversation with the chair of the FCC himself. I want to start with the news that we've gotten in the last 24 hours, the unveiling of these new iPhones equipped with 5G technology. Apple wasn't the first to incorporate 5G into their phones, but when Apple does make a big technological shift, obviously historically the industry has followed suit, and we've seen a wave of carrier announcements about upgrades they plan to make to their networks to improve 5G. So Cristiano, I want to start with you. How much do you think the iPhones themselves will actually catalyze better infrastructure?
Look, we can't really make a prediction, but we're very happy, to see 5G coming to, the Apple ecosystem, to iOS users. I think it just, if anything, it validates the importance of this 5G transition and the fact that we're really getting a scale. And, as we have within, Qualcomm, we expect, for example, when you look with the next few years, it is much faster than what we saw with 4G. It's fair. Within 5 years from now, 5G will represent 45% of the global data. That's kind of one of the predictions that we have seen. So that as we get more users in the network, you're going to continue to see more capacity being built, more coverage being built, and we'll continue down this process of building 5G infrastructure. So I think in general, what we have been seeing today is a very fast transition. It's going faster than people predicted, and at least 1 to 2 years faster than the transition we saw from 3G to 4G.
Now, Guru, we saw the CEO of Verizon, Hans Vestberg, on stage with Tim Cook yesterday talking up Verizon's 5G network, saying you were turning on new capabilities immediately. I want to check you on that. Is 5G really here?
Look, first of all, I think having Apple and Tim Cook and Verizon with Hans endorsing on the stage and picking us as the partner, and Apple doesn't do these things lightly, so that just shows where we are on 5G. So I think the way I would say is, although 5G is still scaling, 5G networks are here. I mean, what we've done with ultra-wideband and 5G access now is going to be dependent on living in a compatible location as coverage expands, right? Being on a compatible network and having access to a 5G enabled phone. And now, are we getting a 5G enabled iPhone, which is the biggest thing that came out yesterday? Will truly accelerate, I think, what we just heard, the 5G interest, access, and connectivity. So all of this comes to, you need a great network, you need a device ecosystem, you need use cases, which we'll, I'm sure, talk about later. And then you need the consumers being ready. So I think Apple has clearly endorsed our technology, what we built on 5G, our ultra-wideband strategy. And we've been partnering with them in their labs for a long time now, which now we're thrilled to be able to bring to next era in mobile to consumers alongside with them. So it's here. We are in many cities right now. When you think about ultra-wideband, we also announced 5G nationwide yesterday to be accessible to 200 million consumers. So we are here, and Apple is going to help scale it further.
Now, Andrew, you've been making investments in 5G technology for a really long time. What opportunities does this open up?
Sure. Thank you, Emily. First, thank you very much also to the Milken Institute for today. And thank you to Chairman Pai for his remarks in the prior session. It was good to see him again and the ongoing work. It's been a rapidly developing landscape of opportunities for investment. I actually approach the sector as both an investor, operator, board member of CTIA. I think most importantly these days, a parent of 3 children who are pushing me on innovation in the sector. I'm seeing developments across a few fronts. On the health sector, what we're seeing is in healthcare, x-rays, surgeries, others being really moved very quickly from a 4G world to a 5G world where we need the bandwidth to create that connectivity. Commuting. I couldn't tell you what the future of commuting is going to look like, but it's going to look a lot different. And without 5G, it's not possible. So CV2X, critical if we're going to have driverless or autonomous cars. The workplace. So I'm in a temporary office here today. We have found that office space is changing and moving, and some of us are working from home and some from an office. All I know is in a 5G world, the session today would be flawless in terms of connectivity, and our ability to interact, I think, moves rapidly from, I'm going to make the analogy here, if 4G is turning to 5G, I think it goes from a two-dimensional world to a three-dimensional world. So lots of areas to invest and lots of long-term prospects.
Amy, your job is to look into the future. How will 5G actually change our lives as consumers, aside from my buffering issues?
So I think that we're a little stuck on equating 5G with faster video downloads. And while that's certainly exciting and important, certainly for my own child, as she's working, schooling from home and I'm working from home, the real consumer applications that are going to be meaningful are a little bit less obvious. There's an emerging ecosystem that enables us to effectively rent out the unused compute on the devices in our homes, not just our computers, but our smart doorbells and our smart refrigerators and things like that. And that distributed ecosystem of computing will unlock supercomputing networks, which certainly helps different fields like the sciences, but also is going to enable people to earn money while they sleep. This is one of hundreds of emerging value networks that we're just starting to see materialize. And I think the important thing to bear in mind is that we're on a long-term trajectory. China had a top-down plan to roll out 5G nationwide by 2025. So that just gives you some indication of the fact that it's going to take a while. So I think we need to also temper consumer expectations that if they wake up with their brand new, beautiful iPhone and the download speeds aren't instantaneous, that doesn't mean that 5G isn't happening. It means that we're in the process of rolling things out. And aside from distributed computing, there are synthetic content, synthetic media that will effectively enable people to clone themselves, and send out digital twins to do different things, synthetic biology, which unlocks entirely new, great frontiers in the biomedical sciences. And, I could go on and on.
Guru, you weigh in on that? Because so much of what Verizon Media is working on is the future of entertainment. And if 5G, how much does 5G impact the quality of our video, the possibilities with our video or not?
Quite a bit. So, I would just take adding on, we talk about three big use case buckets right now, at least on the consumer side. You take sports, you can take gaming, journalism. So when you take sports as an example, we think, 5G will revolutionize how the fan experience, both in stadium at home. I don't know if you saw the announcement yesterday and the ad that we have out there. We actually launched something called the NFL 5G Super Stadium app. So the idea here, again, it brings you closer to the action so fans can see and feel. So we have like 7 different camera angles on the field with literally no latency, or literally what you can see with the naked eye in the stadium, you can literally feel the same thing on the device. We can create immersive player's eyes view in terms of following the play, or add an AR overlay. So the first thing on sports, and I would say broader media, the AR space is going to go from non-mainstream to mainstream. Now, of course, a lot of these things will take time, and we have to start creating use cases for consumers. The Super Stadium app is on the Apple, the iPhone device. Gaming is a great example again. You take about Riot doing 5G-enabled cloud gaming, again with low latency, playing games wherever you are. We have a partnership which we announced many months back with New York Times, again in journalism, allowing users to get inside the story, being able to interact with it, which you cannot do that. Today you are more 2D, and you think about this enabling, making it more 3D. Enterprise is where, again, behind the scenes, as you think about the industries, I think health is a big one. Manufacturing is a big one, where you start removing a lot of latencies and inefficiencies within the ecosystem, where this is going to transform the access, but also scale fairly widely. So those are some use cases. We've already started the work on it across the industry. Consumers, of course, we've had some use cases also on the business side.
Before I go on, I just want to tell our audience we are taking questions. So if you have something you want to ask, please submit it and I will get to it as I can. Cristiano, I know that you are so focused on the data and you actually have a ton of data on where we are on this. Can you give us the sort of lay of the land in terms of where the US is on 5G, in terms of devices and speeds compared to other countries?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, it's, the way to think about 5G is really like wireless fiber that will connect you with the cloud 100% of the time. And what we're starting to see now in real world measurements as 5G networks and devices, are starting to be in the hand of consumers is really incredible. So I'll make a comparison. If you look, for example, in the UK, you have average, not peak, average data rates on the 5G networks, which is 6 times what you had on 4G, so 6 times faster. If you look, for example, Verizon, which is here in the panel, the Verizon ultra-wideband network is 11 times faster that of the 5G in the UK. So, and we're starting to see now peak data rates, for example, on the ultra-wideband in excess of 3 gigabits per second. So it's really an incredible capability. And that's going to speak, I know the conversation, it just happened on the panel about use cases. That speaks to it of the almost unlimited possibility of what you can do with it, because with those speeds you can have the ability to do on-demand computing. So you can have devices that are much light on processing that can rely on the computational power of the cloud, and with that you have an incredible number of possibilities where you deploy this technology.
So, Andrew, let's talk then about the infrastructure challenges. Companies like Qualcomm have been out there shouting about the coming of 5G for years. We're finally almost here, but still not quite. What are the challenges to building out the network to where it needs to be so that if you do buy one of these new and pricey iPhones, you see the benefits of this technology?
Sure. Thank you, Emily, for asking that question about the challenges. Through my role as a chair and owner of Qualtech, we've been a partner to Qualcomm, the carriers, and others in the ecosystem through each successive generation of technology across the U.S. landscape. I think we're at an inflection point where, from a government perspective, we need harmony between kind of state, local, and others. I think Christian and I discussed a little bit of this earlier in the year about the ability to kind of add new sites and the ability to sort of cut through, I'd say, red tape in that regard. We'd love to see at a federal level, when we think about infrastructure and utilities, that telecom should sit right next to utilities when we think about expansion, because again, many of the use cases that are critical to our everyday lives rely upon that deployment of 5G. Again, in my role with Qualtech, we are the feet on the street, the nuts and bolts, the people climbing up 130 feet to fix towers and the people going underneath the ground. And there are many folks out there. What I will say is we need more job training as an industry. We need to be able to provide opportunities for those who don't have a job today to transition into this industry that's growing, that has tailwinds. And I think the future is quite bright for 5G, especially having qualified talent executing on it.
Now, obviously, there are a lot of people and companies working on making this happen, but it's certainly not going to happen overnight. And I'm curious, Amy, as somebody who looks into the future, given all of the things you talk about how impactful 5G could be, do you worry about U.S. competitiveness? Do you worry about other countries and their technology industries like China surpassing the United States?
Sure. So, there's a lot of sort of techie buzzwords that seem to be filling our conversations lately. We build quantitative models to try to understand the next order impacts, and that includes what we do and also what we don't do. The reality is that we've been embattled in conversations and debates around technology acquisition. China is, very quickly moving toward a sort of cyber sovereignty policy that it's been very public about, not to mention industrial policy as a way of intertwining some of the larger policies that are economic in scope, like the BRI, with some of its tech aspirations. And the challenge is that it's true. Guru laid out a handful of use cases. There are more, and some of these could mean incredibly robust. It could help an economy like ours that might be looking at a recession or a lingering recession due to the pandemic. The challenge is that we haven't been super coordinated, I think, and also there have been some outsized expectations. There is a tremendous amount of opportunity, but we're going to have to balance that opportunity with the conversations that we're having as the same types of networks with different components are being built overseas. And until we're able to resolve some of these tensions, we don't get to unlock some of these frontiers. Just really briefly, the intersection of gaming and sports is esports, which I know has not really taken off in the United States yet, but it's been accelerated because of the virus. There's a platform called Zwift, which is a little like Peloton, but it's real world cycling in a digital environment. And there are, it's one of many different hybrid physical digital sports that are in the process of being born, each with its own value network. So I think we have to take the longer view on this and really think through how is the United States going to remain competitive as others are building out their networks using, different rules of the game.
Guru, do you have any comments there on the esports point? On the one hand, we need better connectivity more than ever. On the other hand, I'm sure there's challenges in the supply chain given the pandemic, and productivity has also, across the board in many organizations slowed down as much as we're trying to make it work.
The way I would say, Emily, and I would comment on what Amy just talked, even China as a comparison. I used to work before this at Alibaba, and I've seen the innovation that happens in China. But I do think US has led many ways in terms of innovation and created the ecosystem. So you talk about esports. One of the things pandemic has done, I'll tell you, it's accelerated what we talked about 5G use case adoption. We said, it'll take 2 to 3 years or 3 to 5 years on scale of the network, devices coming in, and a lot of developers like us, and you name all the other ones building, we'll see the adoption go up. I think last, I would say, 8 months, what it has made it is it is accelerated. We would have never seen the amount of online shopping that's happening, the acceleration on esports, even in the US right now. People are finding ways to do that. Live events, you're doing it virtually, from concerts to watching sports. So what I would say is it's forced almost consumer behavior shift. Now we are at a point almost like 5G is catching up in terms of making those use cases. So what I do think is our consumer shift is user behavior is caught up to China in many ways about how consumers are doing mobile and how they're really getting into. That's what COVID has done, which is great for the ecosystem that we are creating. What I would say, you take esports, we talked about gaming, you talk about health, you talk about education, live events. We've actually gone and launched, you're seeing like social, like Watch Together now, which is happening on NFL Live on Yahoo Sports. Again, that's bringing a version of watching a live game at home with your friends and family. The same thing is happening on esports. So I think we're at a point where we will have similar use cases between two massive markets. COVID is actually, and probably a silver lining in a way, is accelerating us to build those use cases. And that's what is accelerating 5G as well.
Cristiano, Qualcomm, has such an interesting, and you personally, I know, have such a deep look into what's happening in the supply chains. How much is the pandemic slowing the supply chain down, and how could it actually slow down the build out of the infrastructure that companies like Verizon are promising?
No, that's a great question. Look, in the very beginning of the pandemic, and it went to phases as different countries experience, the consequence of the pandemic. We have seen early within the year, as at some point, you had some impact in China, then that started to shift to other countries, and then China was coming back, and you have different degrees. But in general, I will say the industry, especially the cellular industry, have done remarkably well. And even in the middle of the pandemic, what we actually saw on both infrastructure and devices was actually an acceleration of the original plans for 5G for 2020. One of the things we've done early in all of our, I think, earnings call, we have reiterated the number of 5G devices for the year, even as we look at the economic downturn. And it just showed the strength of this transition, and especially, I think, the conversation on the infrastructure. In an interesting way, as a lot of, you start to see less traffic in cities, people kind of working remotely, more people at home. A lot of carriers actually accelerated their deployment because it's just easier to build sites when you don't have a lot of traffic, especially in the urban environments. Supply chain, it's very diversified, it's very global. It kind of speaks from Qualcomm. We probably have one of the most diversified supply chain for, a fabless semiconductor company. And if anything, we saw not an impact, but we saw an acceleration of demand.
Andrew, what are you seeing as you're trying to make these investment decisions, balance these competing trends, predict the future when it's never been more uncertain in a way? How do you weigh all of that?
Great question, Emily. One thing we know is, looking at a Deloitte study, 86 to 87% of executives both said that wireless will transform their businesses in the next 3 years, and wireless is critical to their operations. So we know we're in the right place for many sectors to go from here. We also know that resiliency is key, and what we've seen is, again, amidst the tragedy of the pandemic, it probably accelerates change faster than most expected. And we in some ways get a glimpse to the future faster than we thought. Cristiano just referenced traffic patterns and flows. In a 5G world, what if we had perfect visibility on those traffic patterns, flows, all the goods and services we wanted, and that was highly coordinated? Imagine the efficiency created out of that. And frankly, the benefit of the pandemic, if there are any, which is potentially more time with our families. I have my kids kind of surprised, saying, "Are you really here again this evening?" So in some ways, our lives are changing, some in a positive way, coming out of this. And I look at technology again being a key driver. Another area, education. It's changing. Again, it's morphing to a three-dimensional world. We're not quite there yet, but I did take a school trip the other day. It was to a museum. It was to the Louvre, and I didn't go to Paris. So we're seeing, again, the adaptability and the use cases coming out of it on a personal basis. I'd also say that it's probably caused hopefully for some better work-life balance. And I think what we're going to see is the longevity of us being able to do this with great advances in medicine, doing this for a lot longer. So excited for the prospects. It's not without challenges, and I think we're all united in wanting a world that's better connected.
Those virtual museum tours have been pretty amazing. If you need anything to do with your kids, we've done some of those.
I'm not sure if we'll hop on a plane to do a museum trip again. So
we got our first question from the audience, which brings us to the political aspect of this conversation. To what extent has the current administration's trade policy impacted the development of 5G and digital infrastructure? Cristiano, I'll throw that out to you first.
Look, we're very happy. I think the position that Qualcomm is, and as you can see, I think 5G is good for Qualcomm. And as a global company and a company that have, really invested early to develop some of the key technologies, the standard, the products, and be in a leadership position, it has been a significant area of growth. And I think specific to your question, we always look at the company as actually a stabilizing force in the industry, because we're a company that creates ecosystems, and we license our technology to everyone, and we provide products for people to build devices for their own industries. And if you look where we are in China, we have a very stable licensing environment, including Huawei, which was the latest announcement we made resolving our dispute. I think China, as they grow into 5G, they're buying semiconductors from Qualcomm, which is in the right direction of trade. And we provide not only growth to the United States, but growth to China as they build, their ecosystem of 5G, both domestically and as phone manufacturers export outside China. So I think, everything's going well for Qualcomm. We're very happy about it. And I think continues to be a very stable, relationship with China as well as globally.
Guru, what is Verizon's position on this? Because under this administration, T-Mobile and Sprint have tied up. The mobile carrier hierarchy has changed. And also we've got, this escalation in tensions between the United States and China, which I know has challenged a lot of companies.
For us, it's not been challenging at all. I think we've, as I said, we bet on a strategy, and we have partners like Qualcomm and many others who enabled us to scale on that, and that strategy has worked fine for us. And the government, in many ways, has been very supportive and working through it. Of course, you think about T-Mobile, Sprint. That's, of course, you're getting a newer, bigger competitor in many ways. But I think what we've done with Apple, what we're doing with use cases, I just feel like we have the right set of ecosystem. And for us, it has not impacted in any way at all. And we're keeping our heads down on expanding 5G, creating the use cases, and making sure all the consumers have it.
Now, as we alluded to in the conversation with Chairman Pai, access to broadband, access to connectivity can be have a huge economic impact, and there are a lot of haves and have-nots in this conversation. Amy, what about the economic impact of 5G, given the potential, all the things it can possibly create, all of the possibility of this new technology, but also the reality that a lot of people don't have access to this technology?
So again, I think it would be wise for us all to set our expectations in a more meaningful way and take a longer view on this. The challenge, I think, is that as we imagine the next generation of connectivity and infrastructure, that we tend to use historical use cases and project them into the future without actually confronting our cherished beliefs about how the future could be different. So just as an example, 5G unlocks low code and no code applications in the cloud. I know that sounds like a bunch of gobbledygook, but theoretically what this means is that individual private practice doctors who are sitting on a ton of data, could run an application to help them gain more insights about the practice that they have, or trend lines within the local communities that they're treating. So there's both a business case and also a public health case that didn't exist before. Both Google and Amazon have robotics as a platform, services, again, that are cloud-based. One of the huge opportunities with faster, low latency networks is that you have systems of collaborative robotics capable of doing things. And again, I know that's not super thrilling, but what this means is that small businesses, everyday people, can harness the power of automated systems to do things for them. So if you start to decouple the way that we've measured the economic impact of, say, 3 and 4G in the past, and the plausible economic impact of 5G in the future, the way to get to a much more well-rounded, realistic number is to start looking for all of these individual use cases and impacts across myriad different industries. I mentioned synthetic biology at the beginning. I know, again, this sounds a little strange, but this is the intersection that is very real of artificial intelligence and genomic editing, which unlocks things like new ingredients for flavors, which is wonderful, but also enzymes that can help eat the plastics that surround us, and also the processes that will be used to get us to vaccines for things like COVID much faster. And these all require faster, low latency networks. And in the synthetic biology space alone, this is a market worth $25 billion or more over the next couple of years. So the more that these networks start to go online, the more small cells that we're able to deploy, and quite frankly, the more we're able to educate people about what 5G is, what it's not, and the fact that it doesn't cause cancer or whatever new rumor is going around, the more groundswell of a support that we get to start unlocking all of these different opportunities throughout different markets.
So let's dig in a little bit there. How could better technology, better 5G technology, lead us to a cure or a vaccine for COVID-19?
Is that for me?
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the challenges with trying to get to a vaccine fast is the clinical trial process. And before you get to that process, companies like Moderna have to go through enormous sets of data, model those data, and perform massive computations, not to mention also look for all the different possible permutations for cures. So that's on the computational side. But on the genetic side, being able to recombine, deconstruct and recombine the virus in different ways to help us attenuate it, make it so that it can be used in safe ways. All of this requires the intersection of existing biology and biotech, but also artificial intelligence. And the AI piece of this happens in the cloud in a lot of these places. So again, I know this is like a few steps removed, but the advent of much faster dedicated networks with low latency means no lag, means easier computations that can be done off-site or off premises. And it's a foundational piece of this going forward. So again, the new iPhone doesn't get us to a COVID cure tomorrow. But what I am saying is that this sets us on the right path forward. And in addition to it just being good for humanity, for those who care about international competitiveness, this definitely gives the United States a leg up.
Interesting.
Emily, if I can add a point on that, building on what Amy just said, if you think about the one of the use cases there, it's very expensive today when you think about compute, and also it's very linear. If you take in process or how code is tracked, how you're learning the symptoms and things. So there's a lot of AI and machine learning that's happening, but it's happening in a very linear form. And then when data's come together and making sense of that, there's a lot of delay and there's a lot of compute that goes into it. In the 5G world, you can start thinking about distributed computing. I think we talked about it earlier. Coming in, you add the latency effect, you add the data and bandwidth effect. Suddenly you're accelerating some of these things that might take 3 months, 4 months into days or hours or minutes. So I think the whole aspect of AI and machine learning scaling up, I would say 10, 20x in the fully connected 5G world is real. We have to build towards in terms of building the back end and the server side of it. That's what the reality is.
That's absolutely right.
Cristiano, we had started going down the path of economic impact, and I know that Qualcomm has some pretty detailed research on this. What do you see in terms of the economic impact of 5G in the United States versus other places around the world and in the midst of the pandemic? Has that impact, or the impact that you predicted there would be, decreased now that we're in this situation?
No, thank you, Emily. That's a great question. And actually, before I answer, I just want to add maybe a couple interesting facts to the discussion we just had on COVID-19. Look, you don't have to go way out in the future. There's incredible things happening right now. And I'm just going to give you 3 examples. 2 countries right now, we are basically having a 5G wearable camera that the first line of the ICU, nurses and doctors are using, and actually sending, high definition images and audio to panels of doctors. We have a lot of image now that needs to be done, and information shared in real time across different doctors. And this is the IoT space. There's a number of companies now working with Qualcomm chipsets. Some actually devices went to market doing, test devices. So it's an incredible amount of activity, and just on medicine alone, the United States by the end of 2020 may get to about 1 billion telehealth appointments, which is incredible. And that leads to the question you asked me. There are a couple of things that happened to this pandemic, and it started at a very high level. And I think Guru mentioned about this, what will take the industry 5 to 10 years for an understanding to occur about the benefits of the technology? We're getting that in about 2 quarters. So in about 2 quarters into the pandemic, the ability to understand the potential of what you can do with technology and wireless connectivity and high speed and cloud computing, it's been incredible. And we're seeing a couple of factors right now. Even we're seeing that in 2020. Every company is going through an incredible process of accelerating their digital transformation, and the component of digital economy that they belong to. The first thing companies did is connect other people, and you see that with the enterprise transformation of the home and all of that. But now they're connecting all their assets, and we're seeing an incredible acceleration of digital transformation. Look, just initial studies, and remember, there are many things yet to be invented with 5G, but initial studies are showing total economic output associated with 5G by 2035 is in the order of $13 trillion. And what we see, the reason we have now so many countries, there's over 40 countries now with 5G services, and the reason we're seeing this transition happening in a very fast manner is because there's a clear understanding of what happened in 4G. And in 4G, like Verizon, which is here in this panel, was one of the first operators in the world to build the network. And because of the network, the United States created incredible companies. Among some of the companies, they're the most valuable companies in the world today because of that technology. Europe, for example, as it was late to deploy 4G, did not have the benefit of participating in the early stage or create some of those companies. So because 5G is no longer unique to the telecommunication sectors anymore, it's affecting transportation. We had that discussion here. It's going to go to the industrial sector. It's going to go to medicine. It's going to go to a number of even the financial sector. The potential for digital transformation and creation of the next innovation cycle, the next industrial revolution, it's incredible. And I think because of that, there's a much broader understanding of its economic impact. 5G is not only critical infrastructure for the society and for connectivity, but it's going to be a mandatory ingredient for the future of digital economies.
So speaking of the economic impact, we have another question from our audience asking how can 5G help the non-college graduate who's being left further and further behind in the new fourth industrial digital age? Andrew, what are your thoughts on that?
Sure. Well, I'm happy you brought up, Emily, the question of jobs and the futures of our younger members of our population. You don't need a college degree to contribute a lot to the workforce, to society. There's an estimate out there that 5G networks will support 22 million jobs by the year 2035, a similar year to the one Cristiano referenced. And when we think about job creation, we think it might not look exactly like it does today, but we think the ability for 5G to enable delivery of training, virtual training, augmented reality training, using all the tools in the backbone. Again, this is infrastructure that's even more critical probably than bridges and tunnels. And that's how we need to think about it. And so with that backbone having been built, the ability to deliver specific training and change to the conditions is quite important. Obviously, we've been living through a shock for the past 6 to 9 months. That shock meant that elements of our population didn't have a job to go to the next day. Others were more fortunate to have a job to go to, but in their homes, in their basements, in their attics, and maybe like I'm in a first floor walk-in office today. I think there's a lot of opportunity to provide more skilled and kind of vocational training. I know many parts of our society are missing very skilled workers. And I think if we can work closely, especially with the educational sector, to train people on how to contribute to society, it will actually create a huge uplift for the world, and will mitigate some of the other issues that are going on. I will also say at the same time, we can do it with a better footprint. And so I don't want to lose track on today's discussion just about ESG and sustainability. I'm proud to say I'm contributing less to the carbon footprint than I was yesterday. All the folks that need to get trained can also make those positive contributions, and maybe that's a potential gift for the next generation.
Emily, could I add on something to that before we move on to the next topic?
Yeah.
So within the telecommunications space, I don't think there's been a good job educating the existing workforce what the benefits are to using AR or extended reality in the field. I know that there has been quite a bit of pushback because there's a sense that emerging technology and these better networks are going to obviate jobs, rather than helping everybody understand that this is a better way of fixing something without having to go up and down a pole a bunch of times checking a manual. So I think part of the challenge as we're thinking about jobs of the future is that we haven't articulated what those jobs will require. And I don't think we've done a good enough job helping people understand that predictive maintenance is absolutely on the future and will be enabled through 5G, but the maintenance itself is still going to require humans for a really long time. And the bottom line is we don't have the workforce we need today, let alone the workforce that we're going to need tomorrow. So,
Emily, is it okay for that? Sorry. Go ahead.
Please.
No, I just want to just build on some of the things that, in terms of job market, one, I would call out journalism first. Journalism will change quite a bit in the 5G world. What I mean by that, the AR content creation. So one of the things we've built already, and we're training now a lot of our in-house journalists, but also we brought in partners like Reuters and others, where we're training them to say, hey, how do you get trained to build AR content using our immersive platform? So that's a very near-term example. You call it vocational training or any form, and which is what we're building. Now, I would use Verizon as an example. We've built through our Verizon Innovative Learning Program in over 200 Title I middle schools. We're starting to build 5G labs in those schools so that they have hands-on experience. So what our VIL program offers is connectivity, technology, hands-on learning for both teachers and students. So the idea here is, again, how do we also focus on closing the digital divide we've been doing for the past 5 years, and we'll continue to do that. So that's how we're thinking about 5G labs and educating as well.
Now, we have another question from our audience. Verizon has Horizon Ventures, Qualcomm has QSI, Qualcomm Strategic Initiatives. How do your venture capital initiatives factor into your business model for developing the future of connectivity?
I can start off. On the Verizon side, when we launched 5G first, and we were first to nation 5G last year when we announced it, along with that, we also launched a developer program where we were funding up to $1 million to create applications or people coming with new use cases. So we had, 1,000 plus kind of startups and teams apply for it when we announced that. And part of our venture arm, we continue to invest in a lot of startups and use cases that they're building. I don't have the exact link to the site where you can go and apply, but we are promoting the idea for us to create that ecosystem. You have the network, you have the device ecosystem, and can you create the use case and connectivity ecosystem, which we know we're not going to build all of that. We need the other developers and companies to build on top of it. So we've definitely set aside a significant amount of investment, part of our venture arm. And every time we've done some bold move around labs, again, coming back to access to labs to a lot of startups. So that's how we approach that.
Maybe let me answer. Yes, I'll answer that from Qualcomm. Look, we're very proud of what we have done over the years to multiple technology transitions with our ventures investment group. We had a number of unicorns that came out of that group, and it will be no difference in 5G. We can now look at companies that have a lot of potential in a number of different sectors that are going to be part of this transformation with 5G. And we have been using our venture groups to look and support those. But it's not only ventures. One unique thing about the Qualcomm business model is that we actually create platforms that for other companies to use and innovate on. And we engage with companies, not only the biggest companies in the world, but very small startup companies as well, and we'll support them, especially as we see mobile technology, transforming other sectors like automotive, like Internet of Things and industrial. And we see a number of companies engaging to build, new product and services, and we support them, no matter the size that they have. And I think that's a very healthy practice that had helped accelerate development of not only the technology but create a vibrant ecosystem.
And Emily, I'll give you this, is Andrew. Yeah, I'll give you an example. We actually just partnered with SoftBank on an acquisition really focused on device protection. And it's called Brightstar Corp, so similar name. I used to have an operating role there. But what we're seeing in the ecosystem is this tremendous growth in connected devices. So we used to think about our world as wallet, keys, phone, and which one could you leave behind? And clearly today we don't want to leave our phone behind. The phone has become the wallet and the keys. And as we continue to pivot from there, I think about not just the tablet, but telehealth. Cristiano talked about it earlier. I think my wife, as an internist, represents a few thousand of those appointments from the telehealth. But in terms of wearables and what we're going to see, I think we're going to see more and more companies develop ecosystems around these connected devices, around 5G. We're really excited about the prospects to create a seamless end-to-end customer solution to take care of these devices that in some ways might become more important than cars over time, as cars shift from having a driver to autonomous and maybe a different type of model. So we look forward to, in our case, to frankly leveraging really smart partners out there. We have Verizon out there, Qualcomm, SoftBank, and others. We're making tremendous innovation, and we look forward to learning from them.
How are you all in your businesses modeling this out? I just listened to a conversation with Bill Gates, who said the disease is going to be out there for 2 more years. We're probably going to be masking up and social distancing in many situations for at least another year. How long are we in this? Cristiano, I'll start with you.
Yeah, look, I think the right answer is probably both. They're going to be sipping martinis and they're going to be also working from home. I think the way to think about that is like everything, right? That's how we think about it. There's always an opportunity, and there's always an opportunity for innovation, and you're going to probably get rid of the bad and you're going to keep the good. What we're seeing now is there's a new flexibility of how to think about work, especially with the enterprise transformation of the home. I like to put within those terms because it's been an extension of the enterprise now. Is going to change the enterprise, and the enterprise is not going to go away. People are, I believe, people are going to go back to the office. There's an important aspect of that, a culture and collaboration, but you're going to have a hybrid environment, and it creates a very important, element of conversation, which is the connection between digital and physical spaces. It's very likely going to change how we think about social media, how we think about interaction. I like to go to simple examples. Today, if we have a call with somebody without video, it doesn't feel as good as what we're doing right now. So just video conference finally happened. It's been talking about that 3G days, but now it's not as fulfilling to have a call without video. And I think that's going to evolve into having virtual presence with, holographic images. I think we're going to see a lot of development within augmented reality devices. And we're going to be, companies are going to be working very hard to connect people at their home or people in the office in a seamless way. We're going to connect, like I said, physical and digital spaces. And we're just going into an area of much more innovation. And I think that's what the future, holds. So we're gonna hopefully, I think, are gonna go back to everything that is good, before the pandemic, plus the new good stuff that got developed with technology.
So we're going to get really advanced here and talk about what comes after 5G. So you mentioned 3G there, Cristiano, and 2G, 3G, 4G. Basically, each of them lasted for about a decade. Will 5G last for a decade or longer?
Yes, I have a clear answer to the question. It's going to last longer, but the way to think about this, Emily, is every new technology, it's been probably designed to last for a decade or more. But because 5G as I said earlier, is no longer unique to the telecommunication sectors, it's going to impact every other industry and every other sector, it's likely going to have a very long-lasting impact, and will continue to be in for multiple decades. And it won't prevent, the evolution of that technology to the next generation. We don't know yet about that much about what's coming after 5G, but there is, we know it's going to call 6G, that we know, but there's a lot of conversations already in progress. There are groups being formed talking about the requirements, and it's incredible, I think, a vibrant industry that's getting even bigger, but the 5G will be probably the underlining connectivity fabric. We believe 5G will be the future of the internet last mile, and that's going to stay for a very long time.
Andrew, are you thinking about what comes after 5G?
Absolutely. Look, if there's one thing we've learned from the pandemic is flexibility and patience has really kind of entered the discussion. And so as we think about kind of where we are today and where we pivot to what comes next, I'm looking forward to meeting my digital twin. I think the digital twin is going to be far faster at processing calculations, far better, faster, stronger, every adjective that we can think of. I think it's going to be quite interesting, how it changes. I will come back to your prior question for 1 minute. You said, how has the world sort of changed in the moment? Interesting, I'd say the focus on communities and neighborhoods probably has never been more prevalent in the last 50 years than now, as in some ways we've come back to small communities that do see each other. So our lives today are not fully remote, even though most of us are calling in from remote settings. We will walk out of our homes or our offices and see people. It just may not be jumping on a plane to see them or that type of life again. So it'll be very interesting to think how we take 6G and the future iterations of connectivity and marry that up with probable lifestyle and work choice changes that will marry up and benefit from that technology.
Guru, what are your thoughts? I mean, you're trying to plan for a future that is now, but what about the future of the future?
Yeah, look, I would actually echo what we heard earlier. In terms of the reason we call it a fourth industrial revolution is because every industry here is going to get disrupted, call it next 3 to 5 years. And these are all changes that will last for decades. So that's how I think about this. And I would say we're building some initial use cases, let that be on enterprises or the consumer side, but that will evolve. It's going to be a revolution. That's why it's going to be decades of changes that will happen over next, many, many years. So I would say the future for us right now is making sure 5G scales really well. We provide what we talk about 20x better speed or all the metrics we talk about better than 4G, getting those use cases out there, getting those devices out there to consumers. That's the only focus. And then the one point I would add in terms of what happens to kind of post, or we are in the COVID world still, the way I would think about, again, the change is going to impact across all the 4 key stakeholders, the way we think about it: employees, our customers, society broadly, and then of course shareholders. I think employees, some version of how we work in this new world, virtual and hybrid, time will tell where we net out. I don't think it's time to make a call yet. I think customers, 5G along with COVID is accelerated a lot of the use cases. I think that's where the biggest opportunity for digital is, to meet that physical, or you would call it omni-channel in a way. And I think we're all going to be measured, let that be Qualcomm, Verizon, all the companies will be measured how we stand up for this society. Will be measured in terms of how the company looks after, like shareholders. You think about shareholder value or stakeholder capitalism, that's going to matter a lot in the next decade. So that's how we are looking, at least coming back to work, or how the post-COVID world looks like.
Now, as we start to wrap up, I want to get in one more question from the audience that I think probably all of you can field some version of. Tech has faced a lot of scrutiny in the M&A market. Qualcomm, and Amy's back. Yay. Hi, Amy. Qualcomm Yes, the Qualcomm is no stranger to this. How does this increase in scrutiny affect the short to midterm strategic vision for future growth? Cristiano, I'd like you to answer that. And then if we could all then weigh in with our closing thoughts about how the business landscape changes with the political landscape changing, I think that would be a great way to end this conversation. Cristiano?
Yeah, I'm happy to take the question. As you pointed out, we're not a stranger to that, and I feel it's probably if I narrow the answer within the topic of 5G, it's probably a natural consequence of 5G having broader implications. So like two examples that come to mind. We have a partnership with one of the largest private power grid operators in the world, and part of that is about use 5G to build you build a digital twin of the grid in the cloud and use 5G to connect the power substations, you connect a lot of the circuit breakers, you connect the enterprise, and then if you have the natural disaster, you can use 5G, high speed, low latency. The latency is really important here, and the digital twin and machine learning to self-heal the network. And the IT systems on the power grid, especially if it involves the utility service in some cases, multiple types of power generations, including nuclear, has a completely different degree of scrutiny. If you think about technologies that are going to be, associated with consumer applications. Same is true if you're now running manufacturing from the cloud instead of computers and servers installed at the robots. So because you have now so many other industries, all the way to defense, they have different set of requirements. I think that is becoming something new to the industry, but we probably look within that context.
So we've only got about a minute left. Each of our, Andrew, if you could start, but just give a short answer on your vision for future growth. Then we'll go to Amy, and Guru will have the last word.
Very brief on growth. Tremendous tailwind, both as an operator and an investor in this space. We don't see that changing. We think the build out of infrastructure is critical, and we'll put our money where our mouth is there. As a consumer, I love what I'm seeing with 5G. I've really benefited from it. Thank you, Emily.
Amy?
Sure. I mean, listen, there is no question that a next generation infrastructure will unlock growth across many different industry sectors. The challenge, of course, is policy uncertainty. And until we figure out a long-term vision and are able to stick with it, regardless of who's in the White House or in Congress, we are going to be spinning our wheels a little bit, even if the private sector wants to push ahead. So if we all want to benefit in this brand new world that we are creating, we have to figure out a smart way to collaborate, get everybody on board, and manage expectations.
Guru?
Yeah, Emily, first, thank you to you and Milken for having all of us here. Really enjoyed it. I think from a constraints and scrutiny perspective, it helps us do a lot of innovation. It creates a massive developer ecosystem. Think back to when iPhone launched. I think I would use the same back when it first came out. I think you're going to create a lot of ecosystem. And I would say 5G will have a massive impact on how we live, learn, work, and play.
All right. Guru Gurappan, Cristiano Amon, Andrew Weinberg, Amy Webb, thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to Milken for dealing with our technical difficulties and keeping us all connected. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the show.
Thank you.